When you learn how to harness your anger, you can do amazing things. Being angry is not the problem. It's about getting right up to the red line without going over it, because once you go over it, all of your cognitive processes go out the window. Anybody who says they've never gone angry is lying to themselves. The question is, are you afraid to get angry because you're afraid you're going to go to a rage? You don't have to. You need to learn where that line is. And it's a little different for each person. So then adjusting the flame is about having a good set of skills that help you adjust that emotion level downwards.
Welcome to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, the space where education meets resilience. I'm Dr. Joey Weisler, and in each episode, we dive deep into the personal stories of educators, students, leaders, and frontline advocates who are navigating the complexities within modern education. Whether you're just starting your teaching journey or are a seasoned professional looking for inspiration, we'll explore how to foster meaningful change, prevent burnout, and build trauma-informed communities within our schools. Now, let's take a seat at the front of the classroom as we get started. Welcome back to the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast, where I'm your host, Dr. Joey Weisler, and today's conversation explores one of the most misunderstood emotions in both schools and society, which is anger. For many educators, anger is treated as something dangerous, unprofessional, or even shameful, and teachers are often expected to remain endlessly calm while navigating conflict, trauma, emotional dysregulation, and pressures from every direction. And at the same time, students themselves are often punished for emotional expression long before they're even taught how to understand it. But what if anger itself isn't the problem? Today's guest is Dr. Mitch Abrams, a licensed psychologist specializing in anger, trauma, emotional regulation, performance psychology, and human behavior. His work challenges the idea that anger is inherently destructive and instead asks a deeper question. What happens when people are never taught how to identify, process, or communicate emotion in a healthy way? Together today, we'll be exploring the relationship between anger and trauma, emotional authority, and the pressures that are placed on teachers to remain emotionally composed at all times, and what it really means, as Dr. Abrams coins it, to adjust the flame. Dr. Mitch Abrams, welcome to the show. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much for having me, Joey. I'm really looking forward to this discussion.
This has been wonderful. So I was reading a text of yours in preparation for our dialogue today. Tell us about your book to start with.
Okay, so my book, my most recent book, I had another book in 2010. That was Anger Management in Sports. This book is called I'm Not Fcking Angry. Adjust the flame to get what you want and need. The reason that was the title of the book was because, well, first I was frustrated, as any good anger management expert should be. We get angry regularly. I was really frustrated with the fact that a lot of the stuff that's out there is crap. that people are not really helping folks with anger. They're shaking their fingers, wagging at them for being, you shouldn't act this way, you shouldn't act that way. So I knew I wanted to provide a different perspective that really, I hope that when people read the book, they have a sense of relief and empowerment, that they'll be better able to use their emotions in a way that helps them in life. But the reason why that became the title was when I was writing it, I'm thinking to myself, man, I have so many people that come here and they're almost never on their own volition. They're almost always referred by the judge, by their spouse, by their coach. And every time they come in, it's almost like I could just push record and the thing will happen, will play, and it'll happen exactly the same way. I say, I understand you're here because there was a concern about you having some problems with anger. And their response is not, well, I'm having a tough time. I spilled coffee on myself. I got a lot of stress at work. Their response is almost always with bulging veins and spit flying everywhere. I'm not fucking angry. And I'm like, yeah, of course you're not. But the other thing that goes along with it, Joey, is that I think that people, when they actually tell me the things that they have a lot of difficulties with, it's almost never that I sit back and go, yeah, they're crazy. That's not something to get angry about. It's exactly the opposite. Almost every single time, and I'm fairly empathic, which helps, but almost every single time I'm like, yeah, I get it. If I were in your shoes, I'd probably be pretty angry too. The question is, how angry do you want to be and for how long? And so the theme throughout the book is about reminding people the normalcy of anger. It's an emotion like any other. There's no good or bad to it. And the key is how to use anger in a way that's going to motivate you and get things done and not get you so hot that all your cognitive processes and decision making goes out the window, and then you make bad decisions and hurt yourself and people around you. So that's what the book is all about.
Thank you for that. And when I was reading the book, I was thinking of Inside Out with those little emotions where you do have joy, you have sadness, and then you have anger, which is almost coming off as like the villain in the film in a way, in terms of how emotions work. And one of the main ideas that stuck with me is when you are quoting a moment from your teenage years and you're quoting your mother, where you are listening to very heavy music and your mother walks in and you smash a chair and your mom says something a little bit kinder, but as I'll say it, she says, get that under control or that anger is going to control you. And that's the whole premise of your book, where you say that anger itself is not inherently the problem, it's what people do with it. And so when it comes to the way we work in society and in schools, we see anger as something that is unacceptable altogether. And you also have some definitions at the start of the text in separating anger from aggression. So let's start with those two definitions, anger and aggression. And how can we separate those, especially in settings of education?
Beautiful. Before I do that, because you brought up Inside Out, though, I have to say, Lewis Black was the perfect person to be anger. And I don't see him as a villain. I saw him more as an anti-hero. An important
Yes.
difference. And I think that if we think about, this is going to sound very physicsy, but it's the law of optics, right? If you take white light, you can split it apart to all of the Roy G. Biv, all the different wavelengths of the rainbow. And you could also combine them all and make white light. I think of emotions exactly the same way. I think that you need the whole palette of emotions in order to get the whole. So without anger, you will not have the whole. You'll be missing red if we follow the theme.
Yes.
You'll be missing red and you put it all back together. Now you're not going to have white. And so I absolutely agree that anger is seen as the villain and it's something to be ashamed of. But by carving it out, you're carving out an honest part of who you are.
Absolutely.
And you don't do anything about it, so it winds up coming out sideways, right? It's like anger gets along with shame and says, hey, can you help me out here? Because I'm not allowed to do anything. And then when I finally do something, my hair's on fire and I explode and people die. There's a little bit more nuance to that, right? And so that brings us to the differences between anger and aggression.
Mm-hmm.
Anger is a normal emotion. It has a sympathetic nervous system spike that goes along with it. So that means that you are hardwired, just as you are with fear. The fight or flight response is your sympathetic nervous system. So your heart rate is going to increase, your breathing rate is going to increase, muscle tension is going to increase, you're going to sweat. Unless you're a woman, then you perspire. You'll probably have the urge to urinate. And people will also say, no, that never happens to me when I'm angry. And I say, well, does it happen to you when you're afraid? And they go, yeah, a lot of times I've been so scared I thought I was going to pee myself. I said, okay, what's another phrase for being angry? And they go, I don't know. I said, being pissed. You know why? Because it all goes together. So you get this sympathetic nervous system arousal, which is basically your body perceiving a threat or danger. And now your choices are, I either got to get out of Dodge or I'm going to go fight this thing. And by the way, that's why fear and anxiety and anger are physiologically almost identical. You can't tell them apart. You need special machinery to detect this. So it's a response to either provocation or threat, and the thought that goes along with it is attack, and the behavior is to do so. Whereas fear is exactly the opposite. It's flee. But the thing is that, Joey, you could be angry right now, and I don't know it because there's no physiological or nonverbal or behavioral analog. So that's the part that often gets missed. We think that we only know when someone's angry when they're in rage states. And we should be thinking about this on a continuum. And it could be a mild irritation, some unresolved trauma, annoyances, and yeah, they add up. But it's not until you start to get to this explosion threshold that it goes through the roof, and then it becomes rage. And at that point, your thinking goes out the window, and then you almost always will see behavioral analogs of it. And that's where aggression comes in, because aggression is all about behavior. Anger is just an emotion. When I say just an emotion, I don't mean to minimize it. I just mean that there's a relationship between thoughts, feelings, and behavior. but they're not one-to-one. They don't all have to occupy the same space. You can feel angry and not do anything about it. In fact, one of the reasons why exercise helps with anger so much is that you might still think that person needs to be smacked, but you don't have the energy to do it, right? So when we think about aggression, aggression is another word that is woefully misunderstood. People for years equated aggression with violence. Uniformly, if you're aggressive, it means you want to hurt someone. But meanwhile, if you talk to anybody who's been successful, they're going to tell you that they're aggressive. And they're going to tell you about how they go after their goals. And the reason for that, and if you think about the opposite of aggressive, which is passive, it makes perfect sense. Because unless you're a trust fund baby, things aren't going to drop in your lap. You're going to have to go get it. So aggressiveness, which is really an adverb, right? A description of action. Aggressiveness is the tenacity with which you go after your goals. Passion, fight, heart, right? Now, there are different types of aggression. And the aggression that we want, when we're talking about building successful people, we want them to have instrumental aggression, which means it's goal-directed. A sport example for that might be, I'm playing basketball and I'm driving the lane and I want to put the ball in the hoop. And in the process of doing so, I hit someone with my elbow and I cut them, right? My goal is put the ball in the hoop, not to hurt someone. We accept that anytime you act, you play sport, you interact with anyone, there's always a chance someone could get hurt physically or psychologically. The issue is, what's the goal? The goal is to put the ball in the hoop. There may be people that get hurt, but that's a side effect. We want this paradigm as opposed to reactive aggression, which is what happens in response to a provocation. Someone says something about you. We're going to talk about triggers a little bit later. And the goal is to hurt them. I must make it right. I'm hurt. They must hurt. And so reactive aggression is what we're trying to prevent. And violence is an extreme form of reactive aggression. So if you think about it as reactive aggression is connected to high levels of anger, extreme reactive aggression is violence, we want to prevent reactive aggression. And if we could get good at that, we'll prevent people from being violent. However, as is always the case, there's more strings that come off the ball of yarn. There are people that are violent and they might not be angry when they're doing so. And so that comes from either hostility, sometimes if they have antisocial tendencies, where they believe that criminality is okay and I have my own set of rules and morals be damned. So if we think about it from how it plays out, anger is the emotion, aggression is behavior, good instrumental aggression helps people get where they want to go, and reactive aggression is what we're trying to prevent because that leads to danger to you and everyone around us. And nobody talks about that enough. So when you hear someone say the child is aggressive, what are they actually saying? Well, it could be that he's bullying other kids. That's one possibility. The other thing is he will not be denied. If he gets a 92 on a test, he's going to be in the teacher's face saying, hey, I need 5 more extra credit opportunities so I can get an 103. And we like that type of aggressiveness, and we should own that and master it. Just one last thing before we move on to other things is that I don't know if there's anything more consistently motivating in life than people doubting us.
Yeah, that was my
especially
point.
when they do it publicly, right? And if they insult you, it sucks. That's why I tell people, you don't ever, if you're a teacher, you have something to say to the kid, you pull them aside. Don't ever make someone lose face in public. It is like death by 1,000 lashes, right? But when someone doubts you and tells you you can't, you have a couple of choices. You can cower, believe it, let your self-esteem go in the shitter, or you can use that anger and resentment and turn it into, oh yeah? Fuck you, watch me. I don't think there's any self-talk ever that has gotten more shit done than that phrase. It's the idea of, I am not going to internalize this attack. I'm going to hear what you're going to say. I'm going to believe in myself, and I'm going to use that anger as fuel. That's exactly what I'm talking about when we're talking about harnessing our anger to get things done. You can only do that when you make anger your friend. And you can't make anger your friend if you are ashamed to admit that it even exists.
The first principal I had ever worked for full time in front of the entire staff. So we talk about teachers shaming students. This principal shamed me in front of the entire staff. at a faculty meeting where he was talking about Maslow over Bloom. And he says, we all know Joey's Maslow over Bloom with his 90-second meditation. He says, don't be like Joey, because his test scores are declining. That was announced to the entire school population. And then in private, he would say to me, you're good, but you're not great. And of course, then I had that mentality of, watch me, when I did my PhD, and people are reading my dissertation like, you sound like you're coming from a place of anger. Well, ironically, yes and no. It's coming from a place of aggression, the way that I've seen it as well. And it makes me think about one of my first year, well, I learned to call her just a first year advisor. Her official title was the first year mentor, but there was nothing that this person did that was worth mentoring. She was the school's librarian. She was there for 20 years before me. So my first year advisor really tried to emphasize that screaming your head off is a sense of heroism in front of a class. Like, oh, look at so-and-so screaming down the hall. Wow. Boy, did they know good classroom management that way. And that was celebrated. And as somebody like me, a brand new 24-year-old teacher, I was like, you talk about Mother Teresa. I was Mother Teresa in the classroom of 8th grade students who were reading at a first grade level with self-contained issues that were all mainstreamed into my class. And these students would do everything they could to shake me and rattle me. And whatever chaos is going on, I would just sit there and I would just, yeah, I was angry, but I would just smile at them and watch them. And just like watching this place burn in front of me, literally. And one time a student sat in front of me and he kicked his feet up and he says, Mr. Weisler, why don't you just yell at me? Just scream at me. You know you want to. And I'm just like, why would I do that? Why would I yell? It's going to dysregulate me. It's going to dysregulate you. And nobody's going to win. Why would I do that? And I think about this first year advisor who literally came to me and she says, when they rile you up, they have to be able to look at you and say, uh-oh, he's going to blow. And I think about that as a different way to just approach how classrooms work, because one of the things that you said is that the sun doesn't announce its power. It just kind of rises. So then what does that look like in classrooms in terms of how anger works from all directions? And how do we manage that?
Well, I love your answer to the student. There's a piece to it that is worth adding, which is he probably wanted you to yell at him because that's his language, right? When people are disinhibited a lot, it's comfortable for them. It's what they know. And real power, the toughest guy in prison doesn't have to fight. Real power is when you are non-provocable. And that is really hard. When you're in a classroom with, 10, 20, 30, depending on the budget of the school and the SES, you have 30, 40 kids in a class and every one of them is louder than the other. And you're trying to get control over that class. There is, I guess, some argument to be had for asserting dominance as a teacher. I'm not sure that you assert dominance well by out yelling people, because there's always going to be a louder yeller. The real secret, and I say this to my kids all the time, I say, listen, if I yell, you should listen. If I whisper, you should worry.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Because now I'm not angry. My brain is 100% engaged, and I'm going to decide how this is going to go. And when I've taught in university settings and when I supervise in groups, when things are getting too heated, I'll just sit there and say nothing and let everyone come to the conclusion that your time to talk ended. It's time to listen now. Let's also not put myself up on a pedestal. I get pissed too. And I think that it's important because the cool thing about what you just described, Joey, is that you were aware of it and you decided how you're going to act. And that already puts you 100 miles ahead of most people who find themselves reacting. And I mean, look, we could almost stop this podcast right now and just say, you want to solve the problem? Be proactive instead of reactive.
Yes.
That's the name of the game. But systems tend to be reactive. There are different people that experience anger in different ways. Everybody has different triggers, different buttons. Someone might say, I don't like people who have ear pods in when I'm doing an interview. And there's others that insist on it, right? There's no right or wrong. But the more we know and understand how our body responds when we get angry, the more we know our own individual triggers. If someone curses you out or pushes you or says something that everybody would agree that was inappropriate, that's a direct trigger. you have to protect your buttons. If your buttons are exposed all the time, if I can push your buttons, I can control you. And that's the name of the game. You don't give people the opportunity to dictate your life. And every time you're provoked, they're in charge. So we're not going to let that happen. But the harder part, and I don't know if you can do this without therapy. You probably can, but it's a lot harder because you have to be open-minded to people's feedback, and sometimes it sucks and it's uncomfortable. But it's the indirect triggers. What are the things that will just set you off from 0 to 100 very quickly, and why? This is not an anger trigger for me, but it's a therapy trigger for me. So I've had a lot of people close to me die when I was young. So I don't like working with geriatric patients and clients. They're wonderful for intake. I mean, they're fascinating stories. They share their lives with you, but I know how their story ends, and I don't want to be there when it happens. So I know that that's a vulnerability for me. So I self-select away from those types of clients. Similarly, there might be someone who's very sensitive about their physical appearance. I think I'm fat and everybody makes fun of me. So if someone makes a comment that is pointing to my clothes, for argument's sake, I might be sensitive to it. It's not about right or wrong because you are who you are. And of course, you can work on those insecurities, but you want to know where those buttons are so that if someone pushes them, you can parry and avoid, deflect it so that you don't start escalating. Because if you start escalating, you become increasingly at a disadvantage to make good decisions. And that's true for teachers as well. I don't think there's any doubt that there are some kids, students that just, they get a rise out of getting a rise out of teachers. And when they can make them break, that's their victory.
Definitely, because I think about also how we see anger as a primitive instinct. You talk about that in the book as well, where it is that basic human response that we're working through. And because anger coexists with trauma as well, we have students and even teachers who, like you said, the common denominator is that they are human. You have humans existing in one common space, in the single room every day. So then, how does unresolved trauma shape the way that people experience, express, and even suppress anger? And what should educators understand about that connection before working to label a behavior as either defiant or disrespectful, and how they then react to it as well from students?
So are you talking about the teacher's experience with trauma or the teacher dealing with the students' issues with trauma?
I was thinking both.
Oh, good,
Yeah,
because both are an issue, right?
let's look at both. Yeah.
Right. So, I mean, the simple answer is know thyself, right?
Mhm.
You'll often hear people say, hurt people, as if it's
Yes.
a justification for violence. And it's a little bit misleading because it is true that a lot of people that have issues with anger and violence have a history of trauma, but there's also a lot of people that have been traumatized that never hurt a fly. So it's not true that hurt people always hurt people. I think the thing is this, and again, this is a problem, but also an opportunity. I don't think teachers get any reasonable education about trauma at all, so they don't know what the hell they're looking at, right? And so there's a difference between type 1 and type 2 trauma. Type 1 trauma is when you have a single event happen that might have been horrible and changed your life in a meaningful way, but it was only one. And otherwise, your world around you is pretty substantial and balanced. And then there's type 2 trauma, which is repeated events over a long period of time. And you can have all of the symptoms that you would get with simple PTSD from that type 1 trauma. But now you have other things that go along with it. You have distrust of the world, you have emotional dysregulation, you have a damaged sense of self. And so teachers don't know that there's a difference. And teachers, I mean, look, one of the cool things about teachers, I do a lot of custody evaluations, and I will regularly call teachers and ask them what their experience of the child is in the classroom. And they were always saying, wow, you're the first psychologist that ever asked me. I was like, really? I mean, you have so much data on these kids. And what's fascinating to me is when the kid is so much different in the classroom than they are at home. And when that happens, it's only one of two reasons. It's either they're getting structure in school that they're not getting at home, most often the case, or they're so overstructured at home that school is the only place that they're cool and they can relax a little. But you wouldn't get that information if you didn't talk to the teachers. And the teachers also have inconsistent and sometimes unreliable information from the parents about what the child's home life is like and what their history is. And so you will have some children that the way their trauma manifests themselves is that they're very withdrawn. maybe they're dissociative even, or having flashbacks in the middle of the day. And then there's others that have learned you better get the world before they get you, because keep your head on a swivel. People don't even talk about it. I say this a lot in prison. We have a lot of people in prison that absolutely are paranoid personality disorders. And it's not because they're psychotic. It's a learned reaction to trauma. And they are constantly, I will get you before you get me. And you see this with kids. And not to mention, it's real easy to just say that kid is acting like a knucklehead, right?
Yeah.
And then if you say they're acting like a knucklehead, it's going to take a second step to say they are a knucklehead. And now you just went from assessing their behavior to attacking their character, which is a million miles away. But you see how that step goes. And if the teacher is angry or upset or frustrated, he or she might have difficulty with that nuance. But for a lot of these kids, they're begging for someone to give them structure. Give me a safe place. Tell me that there's limits and consequences. I'm going to push your limits. I'm going to make it difficult for you. In fact, the best teacher I had, I remember, I was in second grade, Mrs. Goldson, and nobody wanted to mess with her. Best teacher I ever had, because she absolutely would not tolerate me mailing it in. She goes, you are smart, you have talent, and if you don't work hard, I'm going to be on you. And she was an amazing educator. And to this day, I mean, I'm going to be 54 years old. This was when I was in second grade. I was 7 years old, and she still stands out as the best teacher I ever had. And I think that for teachers, you need to find your role models, find the people that, and you can't be like everyone else. You are you, but be a thief. Constantly steal good ideas and attitudes and approaches. Some things you try on, you go, that's not for me. But I think that the best educators, the best coaches, the best administrators, the best anything are the ones that are surrounding themselves with people that have a slightly different cadence and figuring out if that can be incorporated in your toolbox. And I feel that the same way with regards to anger management, in that we need to have a toolbox of de-escalation techniques, but you need them practiced so well that you're like a surgeon. All you have to do is reach backwards and the scalpel's right in your hand. Not, oh, now would be a good time for deep breathing. I wish I practiced that once. And then it becomes more difficult. So trauma and anger and in the classroom, unfortunately, I think it's ubiquitous. It's all over the place. And there are times that the squeaky wheel gets to, and we didn't even talk about ADHD.
No, we haven't.
Right? Because God knows ADHD, ODD, oppositional defiant disorder, and conduct disorder also often swim in the same streams. Well, guess what? One of the biggest problems with the diagnosis of attention deficit disorder is people are doing it behaviorally instead of assessing their actual attention. So there are people, children, later adults, that are carrying ADHD diagnosis. And if you used a continuous performance test like the TOVA or the Connor CPT, you'd realize their attention is fine. The problem isn't the attention. The problem is their behavior, which would actually respond very well to good parenting, structure, accountability, etc. But these things run together because once we hear that, we often hear bad actor. And when we hear bad actor, we think resistant to treatment. And then it's where only the good souls would dare to tread. But that's where the magic happens.
I think one of the things that we are coming to realize as educators is, like you mentioned, we typically walk around with incomplete information about the people we share our rooms with. And so you talk about forming this toolkit as well. And what have you found to be the most successful items in those toolkits that teachers work best with?
Well, I think that the most effective is the one that people use least, which is progressive muscle relaxation. Progressive muscle relaxation works off of the concept of reciprocal inhibition, that you cannot be both relaxed and stressed at the same time. So you go through muscle group by muscle group. And again, you have to practice and become proficient. You can start with the fists and you ask them to hold it very tight for 15 to 20 seconds. And then afterwards, they slowly release and you'll feel the relaxation as you go. And when you're teaching this, in fact, I can email you a script that I use that you can.
That'd be awesome. And I'll put it in the show notes as well.
Yeah, sure. What they're doing is they're going body part by body part, muscle group by muscle group. And as they're doing this, I'm also asking them to pay attention to what part of their body they notice the bulk of their tension sits. For me, it's my traps, my trapezius muscles. There are times that I could be having a bad day and my shoulders are up here. And because I'm proficient in it, I know that if I relax that muscle group, I'll roll my shoulders back, bring them down, and I will feel like a cool sense of lightning going down my spine. And then because the whole excitation relaxation thing is all or none, just by relaxing that group, I can relax my whole body. Now, the reason why I hesitated when you asked the question is there are some muscle groups that lend themselves to quick relaxation in a public place easier than others. I have a client I work with, and he found that the best thing for him was working his jaw. And then he'd start doing, and people would think he looks more angry, and he's actually relaxing. So to me, the most effective is PMR if you can use a muscle group to start your, because again, we're not looking to put them to sleep. We're not asking for you to do downward dog in the middle of the classroom. We're just asking you to adjust the flame a little bit down so that you're able to re-engage your brain. And so if you're able to use a muscle group that is not so visible or seemingly embarrassing while you do it, and you can do it quickly because you're proficient, PMR is the best. If not, there's a lot of things you can use. You could use deep breathing, but diaphragmatic breathing takes a couple of cycles to slow yourself down. But even if it's just taking a breath or two with a little bit of meditation, again, we're not looking for sleep. We're looking for a little bit of tone down. Sometimes people will put music on. Sometimes people will take a break and say, I'm going to go journaling. Here, I got one for you. You can't really do this in the middle of class, but you know these guys that everyone, the phones, everybody says, this is the devil? Okay. This is going to be a little bit provocative and controversial, but bear with me for a second. Social media is similar to anger and is similar to guns in that all three of them can be very, very dangerous. But if you are proficient in them, they're safe. If you pick up your phone and let's say you're on a prep period or whatever, you have a little bit of time and you set your alarm for 10 minutes and you pick up your phone and you start scrolling nonsense. Now, this doesn't work if you're in the middle of a lesson, but you know that you're amping up and I got to be chill before the next period or someone's going to hear me say something I don't want to say, right? I think a lot of teachers can appreciate the fishing reel. Like you cast stuff out there and you go, ooh, let me reel that one back in because I didn't say that the way I did, right? But if you take your phone, set an alarm for 10 minutes and scroll, I don't care if it's Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube, but the things that will bring a smile to your face, like who can watch a clip of cats knocking people's wallets into the trash without laughing? Right? Or dogs talking to their owners and actually sounding like they're asking for food. I mean, these distraction techniques can be very powerful and there's nothing wrong with them. Now, we should be mindful that the algorithms are set up to engage you. They're set up to keep you coming back. Let's use technology to help us. But distraction is great so long as you keep it time limited so it doesn't interfere with your ability to get back on task.
Right. We're going to talk about adjust the flame as you mentioned it soon, because when we think about adjusting the flame, it's also like you say, adjusting the volume, like how you mentioned that when you yell, you should listen. Was it yell, listen, whisper?
Worry.
Whisper, worry, yes. And I'm the same in my own classrooms. Like, of course, I never yell, but if I'm just completely quiet and I'm saying nothing, that's like, ooh, like he's really making sure he's regulated for whatever he's about to say to us next. And at the same time, you mentioned that you were working with a client who was an athlete. I think you said she might have been Russian, where she eventually learned to tune out her coaches who are screaming at her and just get their criticism in a way to help her build up versus tear her down from all the screaming and yelling. We'll talk about the adjust the flame momentarily. But before we even get there, I'm still lingering into the idea as to how you say that. How can someone learn to manage their emotions if they can't even identify them? I think you said that in chapter 1. And I want to think about how we understand just emotional communication in our school settings, because like we've also mentioned before, sometimes our students are just craving to have some sort of reaction of some kind from their authority figures in the room. So then what happens psychologically when people feel emotionally unseen for a long period of time? This could even be between students and teachers. This could be between teachers and admins. Like when teachers say, oh, I'm not even going to bother speaking up or offering suggestions because no one's going to listen to make the changes that I want. So what happens when people feel emotionally unseen? And how does that shape behavior and relationships and even identity?
Okay, so there's actually two very different but very important questions in there.
Yes.
One is, how do we improve emotion labeling? And the second is, how do we deal with people who feel emotionally unseen? Let's
Yes.
deal with the second one first. The simple answer is validation. In Florida, for example, where did it happen that it can't be, I disagree with you, but I
Hmm.
still love you and respect you,
Right.
right? And I think it goes a long way. Not just say, hey, I hear what you're saying, but active listening, giving it back to them and saying, hey, listen, when you sense that someone is feeling unseen, first off, good eye contact. I got you. I hear what you're saying. At least I think I hear what you're saying, because that's the other secret to it, right? When people feel misunderstood, they are misunderstood. So, what I do in those situations is I would say, look, this is my sense of what's going on with you. Tell me if I'm on point. And if I'm not, fill in the blanks,
Hmm.
right? Because what it does is it shows I paid attention to you, and I don't think there's any compliment you could give anybody that's more powerful than paying attention to them.
Yes.
You summarized it with language, and not only did you want to validate them, you wanted to test whether or not there's resonance. And more often than not, they'll say, oh, that's just the beginning of it. But at least now we're having a connection.
Hmm.
Now we're making the unseen person seen. And by the way, we talked a little bit earlier of how dangerous it is to make someone lose face because you might never get them back. The other side of it is when you have someone who feels unseen and you make them feel seen, you empower them in a way that you never thought was possible.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of people that, and sometimes it's temperament, sometimes it's trauma, sometimes they're just shy and socially phobic. And if you can empower them and get them talking, and usually it's easier to do it in smaller places first. Either it's a one-on-one when no one's around, maybe a tutoring session or extra help, or then in small work groups. Because for a lot of kids, the social death of saying the wrong thing in front of the whole classroom, I am not willing to chance that. And
Yeah.
so that can be treacherous waters. So you want to try this out in places where it's safe, but it is not nearly as hard to make people feel seen than people think. And this is also where autism spectrum disorders make things much more complicated. But for non neurodivergent child, they crave social validation. And by the way, it doesn't mean that autism spectrum children don't as well. It just may not be the same way as you expect it to be.
Right.
Right? So we're social beings. So they look for that. And sometimes they're terrified to give it a chance. So just one person wanting to hear you makes all the difference in the world, especially if that person is a teacher who has a little bit more authority, and at least in this classroom, than I do. It's one of the reasons why I've always hated and also been confused by hazing. It never made any sense to me. I'm going to treat you like crap to be a part of my group. It's exactly the opposite. You're part of my group. No one hurts you. You are now protected, right? It's so backwards. It's baffling. But, I digress. It's for another day. Let's go back to the emotional labeling thing, though, because we really shouldn't underestimate the scaffolding that the whole building is based off of. In fact, if you said, Mitch, tell me the two things that you cannot do without for anger management, the two things are early detection and normalization. And early detection requires emotion labeling, understanding the physiology of anger, and recognizing triggers. So the problem with emotion labeling, I mean, we have technology. We were talking about phones a little while ago, right, Joey? Every text exchange, you don't get nuance, you don't get intonation of voice, you can't detect sarcasm. And then those damn emojis, right? What does it mean when someone has like, one eye closed and a tongue out, wink at, and so we've presumed that technology will make communication better. And I would argue that that's a mistake. Incidentally, it is also one of the things that I think will make AI very difficult to catch up with humans because we can't even understand each other. The chances of computers doing so is small.
Right.
But emojis are based off of the placards that every kindergarten and first grade class had in their rooms of all the different emotions. And it sounds hokey, but it's a great place to start. Very often, when you ask somebody, hey, Joey, how do you feel? People usually don't say sad, happy, angry, confused. Usually it's good, okay, I
Mhm.
feel like shit, right? None of these are emotions.
Right.
And so when I ask the question, how are you doing? How are you feeling? And they don't answer with an emotion, I'm like, you're going to have to give me a little bit more than that. You're giving me details. You're giving me distractions. How are you feeling? And then if you could tell me how you're feeling, can you help me understand why you're feeling that
Mhm.
versus something else? And then you're starting to create a culture of emotional intelligence. And yes, there's certainly people in the world that are on the continuum of social intelligence, that some people just get it very well. There are some people that have been taught it either from their teachers, by their parents overtly. People underestimate how much children learn emotional intelligence from their older siblings. Younger siblings are almost always emotionally more intelligent than their older siblings because they got to learn from them. The first child is always at a disadvantage, right? And so there's so much richness of how we can understand people's emotional world if we just gave a crap to ask and look a little. So emotional labeling is something that, I mean, it is as basic as can be, but we shouldn't presume that because it's in the kindergarten and first grade classrooms and maybe it's up on a placard that nobody even looks at, that the sixth grader knows how to label their emotions. In prison, the most important question that I ask anybody is, what do you want? Because people are driven by conative natures, what they aspire for. And sometimes they'll give me an emotional answer. Sometimes they'll give me a material answer, but I know where to go with it. In fact, even when you deal with angry and traumatized kids, you can ask them, what do you want? And sometimes you're surprised at the answer. For a lot of them, it's power. I don't want to feel powerless. I want to be seen. I want to have some influence on my life. I don't want to be taken advantage of anymore. All because you asked, what do you want?
Mhm.
So emotion labeling is a critical first step to helping teachers develop a more emotionally intelligent student body. And we should not presume that kids are learning this. While we're talking about tragedy, obviously, mass shootings in schools should not be in any way minimized. But let's not act like COVID didn't cause a major traumatic schism for children. And I think we're seeing the ongoing ripple effects of a lot of children that have significant social deficits. To me, it's one of the biggest red flags about homeschooling. There are some people that are big champions of it. And I would even say for some kids, it's exactly what they need. But you just don't get the social reps that you do in a classroom. And it's very hard to get that experience in other ways.
Absolutely. And I know in your book, you also mentioned that we use emojis in a very ridiculous, almost laughable way to try and cover these really big, abstract human feelings. And yet at the same time, I still continue to think about, so then in schools, how do we actually teach emotional intelligence, or can it be taught?
Not by the people that are there. This is not an insult to schools. This is an insult to bureaucracy. People are prone to repeat what has become the cultural norm. And people presume that because there are many teachers that are amazingly emotionally intelligent, therefore all of them are.
Mhm.
It's about creating real workshops with professionals that are not just educators, not just the people that the union says this is who you use, not the friend of the school board, right? You bring in people that have different experiences and are able to generalize. Like we were talking earlier about the fact that I work with professional athletes and I work with inmates, and people would go, how do those two populations go together? All populations go together. The question is, what are the commonalities and how do you generalize? So the easiest way to say, how do you improve teachers' emotional intelligence is they have to rep it. I had a staff member in one of the prisons once. I walked past her, and I'm several levels above her from an authority chain. Okay. I walked past her and I said, good morning. She said nothing. I was more confused than I was annoyed. So I go to her supervisor and he goes, yeah, she does that to everyone. I said, that's kind of bizarre, don't you think? And we met with her and she said something that was both frustrating but also surprisingly accurate. She said, it's not my job to be nice.
That's valid.
It is valid. It's something that we should remember. But the problem is that she wasn't just having a bad day. She was having a bad day every day,
Yeah,
right? It
bad
was
career.
like,
Yeah.
it's like, okay, either our culture is really bad, which is possible, or she needed to leave and she didn't get there yet, right?
Mhm.
But the expectations, that basic social niceties that we expect students to do, we don't do with each other.
Mhm.
We'll have staff meetings where there will be one or two people that dominate the whole conversation and everybody else is just hoping that the meeting is over soon because we're not creating emotionally safe environments for people.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, schools have a lot more in common with prisons than anybody wants to think.
Mhm.
The students outnumber the teachers by a lot, same thing as it is in prisons. The order of the institution only runs because the students agree with the authority that the teachers have. And it's one of the reasons why when you have a bad teacher doing bad things, it can kill the culture for the whole school. Tenure is sometimes the worst thing that can happen. I mean, look, I'm all about, I believe that people have worked hard, they've earned the right to have a protected job. I get it. But then you also have people that are tenured that they shouldn't be around people. And the ability
Right.
to get them out of the classroom is next to impossible.
Mhm.
And so when I think about how we navigate prison environments or how teachers navigate school environments, we need to be really sensitive to the overall theme. What is the feeling I get when I walk in this building? Understanding that there's going to be outliers in both directions. There are going to be stars that are so great that they were going to be amazing at whatever they decided to do. And there are other people that I don't know how they even graduated high school and
Mhm.
everything in between. And that's okay. But where you want the majority of your staff to be is collaborative, emotionally intelligent, empathic, motivated. I mean, another thing that's similar in schools and prisons, and I apologize to any teachers who find this as an insult, although you might have been joking that you thought you were in prison for a long time. But the greatest danger in prison is complacency.
Yes.
And that's absolutely true in schools and educational settings. The last thing you want to be doing is the same lesson plan for the last 20 years without any thinking about how can I innovate? How can I reach people better? Will this work with some kids and not others? And so those that choose to educate have a responsibility, I think, to continue to grow. And you can't continue to grow without self awareness. And self awareness includes emotional intelligence. Now, who's going to want to be self aware and talk about it if it's not a safe environment? That's how it all goes together, as far as I'm concerned.
Bingo, you're right. And one of the things that I've come to learn, and a few of my guests have mentioned this as well, is that the school environment where you have those really cynical, competitive, complacent educators as well, that's what trickles down to the students' behavior. So when you see cultures that are very uptight, if not even toxic from the students, it's usually because they're modeling what they see from their authorities without even realizing that.
I don't think there's anything I can say in response to that. You just hit it right on the head. It's
Definitely.
exactly right. And you see it on teams as well, coaches.
Hmm.
Coaches that have a certain attitude and then they yell at their athletes when they have the same exact attitude. And look, in some ways, teachers are at a disadvantage because they're swimming upstream from the culture of where the child might come from, whether that's their neighborhood, their home life, or whatever. But I mean, look, you can make a really good argument that the way teachers get paid the most, and I'm not arguing about salaries for teachers, that's outside of my bandwidth. But the greatest payment they get is when they see a child, a student that
Hmm.
came to them and they were in bad shape. And not only did they come out the other side in better shape emotionally, they learn their lessons, and it's not just academic lessons, they learn life lessons, and they become a role model. They will remember that teacher, like my Mrs. Goldson. They will remember that teacher for the rest of their lives. It always brings a tear to my eye when I see someone graduating college and they give a shout out to a teacher from elementary school or someone that made a difference when no one else was listening. The impact that teachers have on these formative years is wonderful and influential and cannot be understated. But it also speaks to if teachers are in a bad spot and they don't have themselves in the best psychological mindset, you can bet that that's going to make it more difficult for the kids to not feel a little bit unstable as well. So teachers have to take good care of themselves.
Let's talk about adjust the flame as well, because you also mentioned the idea of rage rooms and how rage rooms are just this really ridiculous concept because, well, what if next time you want to lash out in the punching bag? It's not a punching bag, it's your spouse. So you mentioned the phrase adjust the flame as a really powerful metaphor because it doesn't suggest eliminating the emotion, it just suggests working to calibrate it using a really internalized barometer. So what does that actually mean to adjust the flame in practice? And how can educators, leaders, or even students learn that difference between suppressing emotion versus trying to regulate it in ways that are both healthy and productive for them?
So where it starts is that you'll often hear people use the phrase, well, I just flipped the switch, as if it's on or off. It's a dial. It's not on or off. The metaphor for adjust the flame, and for any vegetarians out there, this metaphor might fall a little bit short on you, so I apologize. But there are a few things that make me happier than a really good steak. And I like steak rare, but it's got to be very charred on the outside. The secret to cooking a good steak is high heat, like really high heat, like 600, 700, 800. You want it charred on the outside. What happens if you cannot control the flame? You don't get a wonderful dinner. You get a baseball glove, you get a piece of leather. And by the way, any of you that like very well done steak, I would argue you're not eating steak at that point. But the reason why this is important is that anger is exactly like that flame. When you learn how to harness your anger, you can do amazing things. There's something called the Yerkes-Dodson law, which talks about a curvilinear relationship between arousal and performance. And so we know that at moderate levels, just talking about physical stuff right now, but at moderate levels, anger makes you stronger, faster, gives you more stamina, decreases your perception of pain. That's going to help you do a whole lot of stuff, right? Being angry is not the problem. It's being over the top of that cliff. It's about getting right up to the red line without going over it, because once you go over it, all of your cognitive processes go out the window. Fine motor coordination, decision making, problem solving. Even in sport, we often talk about vision being the ability to synthesize a field, read the data, make quick decisions, adjust, and off you go. All those cognitive skills go out the window at very high levels of anger. So the issue is we want to utilize the emotion to get good things done. Anybody who says they've never gone angry is lying to themselves. The question is, are you afraid to get angry because you're afraid you're going to go to a rage? You don't have to. You need to learn where that line is. And it's a little different for each person. It's a little different for each skill. And so, of course, we want you to stop short of the red line, not over the red line. So it takes some self-awareness. That's why when we talk about adjusting the flame, you can't have that conversation unless you have better early detection systems, emotion labeling, understanding physiology, and all the rest of that stuff. So then adjusting the flame is about having a good set of skills that help you adjust that emotion level downwards. So the most popular things we talk about, and we talked about them before, they also work for anxiety, progressive muscle relaxation, diaphragmatic breathing, imagery and visualization, distraction techniques, exercise. We're going to get to rage rooms in a second. Exercise, journaling, social media scrolling for 10 minutes. The point being is that you want to have your skills portable and ready to go so that when you're getting too hot, you could just turn yourself down. Now, the hard part is sometimes you're the last person to know. But for teachers, that's why if you could get a classroom that is invested in having an emotionally intelligent classroom, everybody's responsible for one another. If a student has permission to say to Mrs. Jones, Ms. Jones, think you're getting a little too hot here, and for her to say, you know something, you're right. I'm going to cool down for a second. And she does something, do it. Then she models it. Then everybody does it. So adjusting the flame is about being able to use your tools to adjust what the situation calls for. But the problem is that there's other things that contribute to anger and frustration that if we're not mindful of, then we're going to constantly see the spring get compressed, right? So this is why problem solving is so important. The most basic theories about aggression back then aggression and violence were the same thing, was frustration aggression hypothesis. The idea that you're more likely to get aggressive when you're frustrated. What frustrates people? When they can't solve problems. So we can help them become better problem solvers. We can help them predict the consequences of their behavior. If I punch a cop, what's going to happen? I'm going to get arrested. If I'm lucky, that's all that's going to happen to me, right? We can improve moral development. We can improve communication skills. I talk about a lot of skills in this book. And by the way, I don't have the market cornered on it. You likely have a bunch of skills that you have at the ready. Now, some of them might not translate very well to the classroom. But the thing is that have your go-tos ready so that when you are getting too hot, you can adjust the flame down. Because I'm not looking to put you to sleep. God knows, if you have a rowdy classroom, the last thing you're going to do is go to sleep. You just want to make sure that you're not so angry, in a rage, overwhelmed, that you say things that you don't mean or you do things that you regret. I think that one of the most powerful things that you can do is, if it's genuine, is to apologize when you've wronged someone. However, everybody knows that a disingenuous apology is a smack in the face. Mm-hmm. And I don't like apologizing. It is not fun. It doesn't feel good. So I have two choices. I could either own it and apologize, hope that I'm forgiven, or I could work hard to try to avoid doing things that I need to apologize for. But if we think about it in a big picture, sometimes even the societal expectations that put pressure on us, we don't consider. So sometimes the worst thing you can do to someone is apologize. And every time I say that, people go, that's crazy. I say, all right, well, let's use this as an example. If I punched you in the nose, would it hurt? Yeah, you bet it would. And then what does society expect me to do? Apologize.
But your nose still hurts.
Exactly. And you are not ready to accept my apology. Right. And it's interesting because a lot of people succumb to that pressure. And someone says, I'm sorry. And you just go, okay. No, I'm not ready to forgive you. And I think it's a very powerful message, both to accept someone's apology and also to say, I'm not ready to accept your apology. Forgiveness is a gift that does not have to be given. So if we're going to talk about emotional intelligence, and yes, I spend a lot of time talking about anger, primarily because I think it's spoken about wrong, but we should be mindful that there's a lot of social pressures of how we're supposed to manage emotions and what we're supposed to do that have subtle undertones. And the more we're able to become aware of those things, the more we have options on how we can handle things better in the future. Look, I also grew up in a neighborhood where there was a lot of violence, and you needed to make intentional decisions. I mean, it's sad that it's the case. People have often talked about schools being the pipelines to prisons.
Yes.
And there's lots of reasons for it, a lot of reasons that people don't want to talk about. But the thing is that it is no longer just hyperbole to say that every time there's an incident of violence in school or outside of school, it can lead to death. It's not an exaggeration. In bad neighborhoods, we always knew that. In the average middle-class neighborhood, we think that that never happens. But because it can get this way, we need to be very intentional about how we engage and how we choose to not engage provocations. And it's scary. I mean, I remember when my high school, and this was in the 80s, I remember when my high school put in metal detectors because of knives and guns and everything that was coming in. And middle America may not get it, but a lot of America does. And this has to do with the acceptability of violence as a way to solve problems, a lack of accountability. There's a lot of children that are not getting a fair chance, at either because their schools are underfunded or their parents need to work 3 jobs each in order to get by. There's no way you can talk about education and the teacher's experience without getting entangled in socio-cultural, political issues.
Yeah.
But it's one of the reasons why when you talk to me about this podcast, I jumped at it because first off, I always root for the underdog. And I also always appreciate the people that are doing work in the trenches that never get enough credit. And if I can offer one iota of perspective or skill or guidance to make people's jobs a little bit easier while they're already doing carrying the weight of the school and the world and the students on their shoulders, then that's a no-brainer to me. I think that teachers are a group of people that people don't appreciate the value until they're not there. Or
Exactly.
except for the few people that when they become successful, they remember, I remember Mr. Weisler, so.
So my last question before we get to our conclusion is just understanding violence in schools. Next week on June 3rd, I'm going to be releasing a segment with my first Sandy Hook interview. I've had some Columbine interviews as well, and of course, I'm talking to you today from Parkland. I'm less than a mile from Stoneman Douglas as we record this interview in the real time. So a lot of teachers are quietly asking themselves difficult questions, such as, when does a student need emotional support? When does behavior become a safety concern? And then they start to navigate this tension in a way that sometimes builds on fear and suspicion when trying to mitigate a future tragedy. So from your perspective, what should schools understand about that relationship between anger, alienation, and even violence in a realistic way from how students are dealing with it? Especially, I think about my Parkland colleagues who worked to report and advocate for the assistance, for example. How do we navigate that territory in terms of understanding those different types of relationships with how trauma exists in our students and how we can help them the best that we can?
That's a lot. The simple, unfortunate answer is it's always there. I would go so far as to say the person that you're worried about is actually not the most dangerous person in your class, because they're at least giving you signs that you're picking up on. I think that seasoned educators, especially, that understand developmental psychology and how kids look, understanding within normal limits, will pick up things. When it comes to assessing children for these types of behaviors, violence on the small scale or the big scale, my experience as a forensic psychologist is that the people that they use to assess them are the wrong people. School psychologists are not trained in risk assessment for forensic matters. Then they may say, well, this is inner city kids. Who's going to pay for it? Well, you could pay now or you're going to pay later, right? The amount of money and social currency you're going to lose with funerals is a pittance compared to the amount it would cost to do this right. Everybody wants to save money. Everyone's worried about their budget until you have a bad outcome. And people are like, well, why didn't we do this? I think that there are things that forensic psychologists can teach school psychologists and teachers about real risk factors, not the things that people think. There are some things that teachers know just as well as psychologists, and that's why you will often hear people going, it wasn't if, it was when. We live in a society right now where you have someone who's violent. It is very, very hard to get them hospitalized and treated. Even if you assess the child. I've done assessments on children that are at risk, and I give a list of recommendations, and if 2 of them were followed, we'd be lucky. Sometimes the answers are medications, and the parents don't want the kid to have medications. Sometimes the answer is an IEP and changing the ratios of adults to children with them. Sometimes it's therapy. Everybody has this issue about cost. Meanwhile, you can make a good argument that violence costs us easily $1 billion a year in this country, if not maybe pushing into tens of billions. If you consider days missed, cost of treatment, people going out on leave after being traumatized, lost productivity because everyone else in the class learns nothing when this kid's acting like a knucklehead, teachers quitting because it's too dangerous, right? The amount of money that it would cost to improve outside services to assist, both from an educational point for the educators, support for the educators. I mean, look, there are times that people curse out the unions, but you want to know something? It's the unions that negotiate the benefits that allow the teacher to go get therapists because they're just rattled by the time they finish the day. There is so much that could be done. And there are the quiet sufferers. People don't realize those that are at risk for suicide are also at risk for homicide and vice versa. And I don't see any trends in suicide in schools going down. I don't see trends in violence in school going down, despite the fact that we're doing everything we can. May is Mental Health Awareness Month. We should all be attuned to this. So if we're also attuned to it, why aren't these problems being solved? I'll tell you the answer. Joey, it's this simple. People are putting a Band-Aid on a gaping wound.
Mhm.
Or if you want to know, you're trying to drink from a fire hydrant. You're just getting blown back. And the teachers know it. The teachers are so overwhelmed, they don't even know where to start. It's really, really hard. And yet they keep getting up every day and going back to work. That's dedication. That's commitment. And I believe very strongly that any institution, and granted, I am not a school administrator, so if I'm pissing people off, I apologize. I don't have to balance your budget. But I think you have a responsibility to give people everything that they need to do a good job. Teachers should not have to be buying school supplies for their classroom, and they should not have to be worried about their safety when they're in the classroom. And when they recognize students that are in trouble and need help, they should be able to get that for them. And a lot of that is beyond the school's means, but it's got to start somewhere. And we just have too much loss, and a lot of it's avoidable. I got to tell you, and I know that it's going to make people sad to hear it, but it's very rare that I see a case that I don't feel like if we were able to get a hold of him earlier. And I say him because the bulk of the shooters and the most violent are men, although we're seeing a big uptick in female violence and gang recruitment. But it's often the case that it's like we just had a chance to figure out what the factors were and put things in place that could have had a different outcome. And that sucks. It really sucks. And I hope that we can do better.
Agreed. And do you have one final message for our listeners for today? One final takeaway?
You're not alone. You're not alone. We're all in this together. I might be holding the trunk. You might be holding the tail. We might not realize it's an elephant, but we're all in this together. And unfortunately, politics and money tends to separate us. There's always polarization instead of collaboration. And I hope that the things that we've talked about here, people have a sense of relief and reassurance that anger is a normal experience. We're all dealing with it. I mean, look, if you followed me around, you'd go, really? You're an anger management expert? Yeah, I lose my shit too. Everybody does. But the goal is don't be so hard on yourself and continue to try to get better.
Thank you so much for that. That was Dr. Mitch Abrams joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. And what I appreciate most about this conversation is that it refuses simplistic thinking, where anger is not automatically violence, calm is not automatically regulation, and silence is not automatically peace. And these emotions are primitive, and it's how we act on them that makes a difference. The key is knowing when we are in charge. In education especially, we often ask people to suppress emotion before we even teach them how to understand it. But emotional regulation begins with recognition, with that language, that reflection, that awareness, and that willingness to ask what emotion may actually be trying to communicate beneath the surface. To learn more about Dr. Abrams and his work, visit Dr. Mitch Abrams on his official website in our show notes. And a very big and special thank you to Dr. Julie Davelman for putting us both in touch. And as always, thank you for joining the podcast. And we look forward to hearing from you next time as you keep on telling your own story. Thank you for joining us on the Classroom Narratives Healing and Education podcast. If today's episode inspired you or made you think differently, I'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment or review wherever you listen to podcasts and stay connected with us on the @Classroom Narratives podcast over Instagram and Facebook. Remember, together we can transform our scars into stars in education, one conversation